Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Vegan Spirituality online gathering. My name is Lisa Levinson, and I'm the director of the Sustainable Activism Campaign for In Defense of Animals. And part of this campaign includes our Vegan Spirituality program and this online gathering. We also have gatherings that meet in person in different areas across the United States. And so if you're curious to learn more about that or would like to start your own, you can visit us at veganspirituality.com. So tonight, we're super excited. You may be able to see Steve if you're online with us right now. Steve Kaufman is our guest, and we'll introduce you officially in just a moment, Steve, so he can wave to you if you can see him on your screen. And we also have our co-host, who's Judy Carmen. She's the author of Peace to All Beings, and I'll have her introduce herself in just a moment. So we're super grateful to all of you for joining us this evening, and this is our special opportunity to gather together to explore veganism as a spiritual practice. And we do this by bringing in different teachers and leaders who are from really an interfaith community to talk about veganism within their traditions, and also to talk about spirituality in general. So we're super happy to be able to have this opportunity to gather together. So I think, Judy, if you're there, I'll turn it over to you, and perhaps you can share a little more about Steve.
Okay, I'll be glad to. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Sorry, everybody, I'm not showing up on the screen. I'm some technical thing, but I'm here, and I'm Judy Carmen. I'm the co-host of this wonderful vegan spirituality program. Dr. Steve Kaufman is our distinguished guest tonight. I'm so glad to have you with us, Steve. He is an ophthalmologist and a clinical assistant professor at Case Western Reserve University and Northeastern Ohio University's College of Medicine. He's co-chair of the Medical Research Modernization Committee and president of Vegetarian Advocates in Cleveland and chair of the Christian Vegetarian Association. And the website for that is christianveg.com. He is also a board. Did I get that right?
.org.
Oh, .org, sorry. Okay. He's also a board member of the Society of Ethical and Religious Vegetarians, and I believe that is serv-online.org. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, good. And writes and lectures extensively on animal experimentation, scientific shortcomings, diet and health, and Christian spirituality and vegetarianism. His books include Guided by the Faith of Christ, which the subtitle of that is Seeking to Stop Violence and Scapegoating. And he also wrote Good News for All Creation, Vegetarianism as Christian Stewardship. So we are very excited to have you, Steve. And my first question is, I know everyone's curious, tell us how you became vegan and how did that work with your church community? Did you have any other people that were vegan, or were you the only one? And how did that all come about?
Well, it actually started way back in 1979. And through a series of inquiries, investigations, ultimately led to Peter Singer's book, Animal Liberation. And that pretty much convinced me. There were other influences along the way, but after that I said, I can't participate in these cruelties. Ethically, it just can't be justified. I was not Christian at that time. I didn't get baptized until 2000, and a lot of that had to do with not being convinced that the Christian faith was as supportive of a plant-based diet as I felt it needed to be for me to be comfortable to self-identify as Christian. And I was raised in a Reformed Jewish tradition, and I I didn't abandon the Jewish faith or renounce it. It was more a matter of adopting Christianity, seeing the model of Jesus as being inspiring in many ways, and so I feel comfortable identifying myself as Christian as well as Jewish. Within the church community that I'm involved, I'm not alone in the way I live my life, but I'm a minority voice, to be sure. It's a United Church of Christ congregation,
Okay.
and a vegan diet is welcomed in UCC, which is a more liberal congregation. It's not as a lot of other churches are not as open to veganism as UCC, of course. They wouldn't kick you out, but they wouldn't be supportive or in fact they'd be resistant to people saying that we should treat animals very differently from the way we are right now. So that's
good to know.
a nutshell. Haven't met a lot of resistance, but haven't necessarily gotten a huge amount of enthusiastic support for my points of view either. People have been respectful, but not necessarily enthusiastic supporters.
Right. Yeah. So, so how did you? Okay. So, yeah. So your veganism started with Peter Singer's book, and
Right.
then
It was more of a secular
spirituality came later.
Yeah, it was more of a secular argument that I found compelling, but I certainly find that Christianity and veganism complement each other very well.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I think that people kind of get it when it comes to the kind of values and principles that Jesus was promoting. He himself being inspired by the Hebrew Scriptures. I think that certainly favors the vegan diet.
Oh, definitely. And so what do you see is actually Christian about vegetarianism or veganism?
Well, I don't think
How
that
do they go together?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're very compatible and it works for me, but I don't think that there's anything necessarily hugely distinctive about Christianity with respect to other religions, because all religions point towards compassion and respect, and virtually all religions acknowledge that non-humans should be part of that circle of compassion. So I can see just about any religious tradition supporting the vegan diet as well as the vegan lifestyle, as it were. So it's more a matter of kind of what works for me, more than saying that it's got to be, that you have to be Christian to be vegan, or that it is distinctive in supporting that diet. One thing that I find interesting about Christianity, but again, not necessarily unique to the faith, is that there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of tradition and writings and stories that I think identify scapegoating as a problem for humans dealing with each other and dealing with nature and dealing with non-humans. I think that there's a lot of recognition of the problem of scapegoating and some stories that can be helpful in trying to overcome this tendency within the Christian tradition. Again, not necessarily unique to Christianity, but something that, at least for me, kind of works, because I think Christianity does identify the problem quite well and offer some helpful ways to approach this universal problem of scapegoating.
Could you talk a little bit more about that? I know you've written quite a bit about it, and especially in your book, your first book, The Guided by the Faith of Christ. What do you mean by scapegoating?
Well, scapegoating could be thought of as giving excessive guilt to individuals, usually for purposes of relieving oneself of guilt. The victims of scapegoating aren't necessarily totally innocent, though in the case of non-humans, in general, they are. But they're given excessive guilt. And so by definition, it's unjust, because you're accusing and punishing individuals for things that they didn't do, or at least not as guilty as claimed. So that there's a moral element to that. And then there's so much within the Christian tradition that then starts to look at this particular problem. And one way to look at the faith through a lens that looks at the problem of scapegoating identifies where the problem lies and tries to find solutions. It's not an easy subject to summarize in 25 words or less. Is why I wrote a book about it. And I'm not the only one who's sort of been looking at these kind of questions. I was inspired significantly by the writings of René Girard, who wrote the book Violence in the Sacred, and others who've been trying to look at this general problem of scapegoating. But one way to look at it is that human communities, really since the beginning of time, have come together through the scapegoating process, according to Girard. And I think, to a large degree, I think he's on target here, which is to say that by identifying themselves as part of the in-group and excluding other individuals, what keeps the group together is to say, I'm part of this group and you're not. And that's not the kind of community that Jesus tried to promote. He wanted to bring everybody, those who were infirm, the widows, even the taxpayers who were despised by the community. He wanted to bring them all into one community and not to have anybody scapegoated. And it was a radical notion in many respects because it's so different from the way humans have normally come together as a community. But it's the way they've got to come together if there's really going to be a just and peaceful community.
Right. So it's could also be looked at as sexism, speciesism, racism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All of those who are excluded are welcome to be part of that group. Now, the traditions that we have from the gospel narratives do not include animals necessarily within that so-called in-group. But there's a lot of good evidence that Jesus cared a great deal about animals. And, some of the writings of Keith Akers, particularly his most recent book, Disciples, makes a very strong case that Jesus and his movement were very concerned about animal issues and probably adopted a vegan diet.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of evidence for that.
Right.
So from a Christian viewpoint, strictly speaking, is eating animals could it be considered a sin?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Paul had said that if you know what is wrong and you do it anyhow for that person, it is a sin. And if you know that harming animals unnecessarily is happening and it's wrong, and doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that one out, the evidence is overwhelming out there. I mean, if to not know that animals suffer on modern farms takes willful desire to not know, because the information is just too readily available out there. And so basic common decency would say this is a wrong thing to do. So I do believe that unnecessarily harming animals is a sinful activity. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that humans can't harm animals in any situation. There are people who need to, for example, hunt animals for survival. Not very many people, here in the developed West, but in some parts of the world. And for those people, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a sin at all. But for those for whom it's an option, a choice to participate, yes, for those people, I think it's a sin.
Okay. Yep, that makes perfect sense. So since Christians in general have been unsympathetic to animal rights or veganism, doesn't it make more sense to show fallacies in Christian beliefs?
Well, that certainly is one strategy to try to show that, for example, some of the Christian beliefs are not reasonable from a scientific standpoint. But I'm not convinced that that's a very effective strategy, for the animals or for promoting the veganism cause, because people are going to have their metaphysical beliefs, and it's going to be difficult to convince them otherwise. It's part of their worldview, and I think that for many people, showing that the faith tradition supports a vegan diet is going to be a more effective strategy than trying to say, for example, that some of the Christian traditions are not well grounded in science or fact. So, I think that there's two ways to approach a Christian audience as an animal advocate. One is to point to the passages and the traditions that favor animal protectionism. For example, in the Garden of Eden, all creatures and humans were prescribed a plant-based diet, and this, therefore, could be described as a biblical ideal to which we should all aspire. And another approach is just to simply point out the secular arguments, that it's unjust, that it's wrong, that it's cruel. And I think that can resonate with a lot of Christian Christians as well. They might argue, well, the Bible says it's okay to eat animals, but even if they cannot be disabused of the notion that the Bible might justify their eating of animals, it doesn't encourage their eating of animals, and first certainly doesn't mandate their eating of animals. So it's clearly a choice on the part of Christians whether or not to eat them, and as a consequence, I think the secular arguments can be compelling as well.
So that gives us, any of us out there, and really it applies to other faith traditions too, as we do approach churches and faith traditions with the ideal of veganism, sounds like a really good strategy of talking about the biblical ideal, but keeping it simple and not arguing biblical
right. That's not going to work. You're right.
Right.
Playing the dueling Bibles game usually doesn't work because,
right.
For every passage that you can bring up, they can bring up another passage where the Bible describes eating animals without any evident reprobation. So, so I think that just kind of pointing to the positive passages. One of the things that we've done is try to create a short, concise, compelling booklet, which we call Joyful Compassionate Eating, which gives some of the basic reasons why Christians should consider a plant-based diet. And I think a lot of people found that to be compelling.
That is an excellent booklet, by the way, everybody. And how can they order that, Steve?
Well, I mean, through the Christian Vegetarian Association is certainly an option. That's, christianveg.org. They can certainly get it. And we're certainly glad to send them a free copy. And at our website, they can review a PDF of the booklet as well.
Oh, great. But if they were going to go to a church or a concert or something like that, they could get a box of them and hand them out?
We're glad to send people the booklets to leaflet. And that a lot of what our ministry does is go to these Christian concerts and revivals and other events and hand out the booklet to those attending these events. Yeah. It's generally been very well received, and I think
it is. Yeah. I've done that myself, and it is really a pleasant activity.
Well, every once in a while you're going to run into people who want to argue with you, but that's the world, and there's ways to just say, hey, if you've got questions, contact the CVA, and they'll be glad to answer them, and we will.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, but generally people are very receptive and nice about it.
Or they say no and move on. Either way, it's not an unpleasant thing to do, and I think it's a worthwhile thing to do.
I do too. So, what do you say to people who say that God gave man dominion over all creation?
Well, that they're probably referring to the first chapter of Genesis, and in that passage, humanity was given, quote, dominion over the rest of creation. But shortly thereafter, all of creation was mandated to have a plant-based diet. So whatever was meant by this notion of dominion certainly was not to be equated with tyranny, which would better describe humans' relationship with animals today. So, I suspect it was a similar concept as the reigning king might have over the subjects. A good king is supposed to look after, protect, and in many respects serve the people over whom the king rules or has dominion. And I think it was sort of in that context because, of course, at that time they didn't have democracies, so the governance was by a king, and I think that there was a notion that there should be a similar relationship between humans and non-humans, but not one of violence or tyranny.
Right. Yeah. So that's a good answer to that because that comes up a lot.
Sure it does. So, and then people often like to talk about how Noah was given permission to eat animals, and to that I point out that permission is not the same thing as a mandate. In the world in which we live, which has violence and scarcity and the like, some people find that they need to eat animals. After all, after the flood, there were not a lot of plant foods around to consume.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that that's a mandate for the way we're supposed to be today, any more than the notion that Jesus probably wore sandals, but I think it's okay to wear things other than sandals today. It's not a mandate. It's a way of living, but not necessarily the only way or even the best way.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Christian Vegetarian Association, and how did it start, and what are its goals?
Well, it started around in late 1999 by a Canadian, Nathan Braun, and he got together a board of directors, and I got involved relatively early in its history and have been involved ever since. And its goal is to show that a plant-based diet is very compatible with Christian faith and tradition, and to get the word out about that. And we do it in a lot of ways. Our booklet is certainly our main vehicle for that, but we've got Christian education materials, a DVD and a study guide for that purpose. We've got a Yahoo groups discussion group. We've got a weekly e-newsletter. We try to have outreach in a variety of ways to and then to a degree, we also try to provide a certain amount of support, both emotionally and practically, for people who struggle to live in communities that are not supportive of their plant-based vegan diet. That can be a real struggle. The families are resisting, the friends are resisting, and the like, because they find it challenging. And the thing is, if you liked a color that was different from all the colors that your friends liked, that would not alienate you from anybody. They just say, "Oh, that's strange," but they happen to like a strange color. But if you say, "I'm going to live differently from my peers because I just think this is the right thing to do," well, that's a moral shot across the bow. Even if you're not trying to be judgmental or critical or anything along those lines, you've taken a stand for justice that differs from what other people are doing, and that's going to always create a certain amount of tension. And so,
right.
Part of what I try to do is, offer encouragement and support for people who find themselves in a difficult position where they know what's right, but they also find that it's difficult for them at a personal level sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it can be very difficult, and some people leave the church because of it.
A lot of people have. But I like to talk about the role of prophecy and how in the Hebrew scriptures and the example of Jesus, the role of the prophet is not an easy one. It can be extremely rewarding and meaningful and valuable, but it's rarely easy. But Jesus once said that when the Holy, in essence, to paraphrase, when the Holy Spirit calls, you got to answer, and it's a great sin to sort of deny the Holy Spirit. Once you kind of know the truth, it's kind of hard to turn around and say, I'm not going to accept that. I'm just going to kind of continue on with my way of living and being. It's not what Christianity is about.
Right. Yeah. And it is very challenging, and we do need each other to support each other, which is what our vegan spirituality group is all about. And hearing you speak is very comforting, I think, to all of us, to know that you're out there and there are other Christians out there, and we may be the only one in our church, but there's others spread out around the country, and I guess maybe that's the way it needs to be right now. If we were all in the same church, we wouldn't be reaching out to others who haven't yet figured this out.
And I also think it's important that we support and encourage each other along our various paths, because none of us leads a life that has no footprint on the earth. I see veganism as a ideal and as a goal, but none of us can avoid interfacing with animal products in the world in which we live. And so, supporting each other along the path, because there's a lot of people who are in different places along that path. And I find this in the animal protection movement, people who aren't necessarily as far along as, you and I might be, it's not to say, oh, it's okay to eat, to do these things. But on the other hand, I think it seems like sometimes people who aren't quite all the way there are the ones that get the most grief. and if that's the case, then a lot of people say, well, this is not necessarily where I want to be. This is not a community that I'm going to be comfortable interfacing with. So I think it's important to honor and respect each of our journeys, and not to endorse things that we don't think are right, but just to honor that all of us are struggling to be as compassionate and kind and respectful as we can be, and all of us fall short in various ways.
Well, we do, and it's we're constantly finding out new things that do involve harming animals, whether it be a hand sanitizer or something like that we've been buying, and then suddenly we look at the ingredients and go, oh no, now I have to find something different. And it goes for so many products, and like you say, there's some things we can't avoid at all.
Right.
And so yeah, we need so much support for each other.
Yeah, sure. And you know,
what? Go ahead.
And yeah, so you know, there's obviously different ways to look at this, but from a Christian standpoint, you know, there's this whole notion of grace, which is that we're all, quote, fallen, and all fall short of the glory of God, as Paul says in Romans, and as such, we kind of need grace to feel accepted, for our shortcomings, that a sense that our sins are forgivable, and all of us sin. And you know, in the way I interface with people and the rest of the world, I certainly do my best to be kind and compassionate, but that doesn't mean that I'm always there. And you know, we all need forgiveness. And with that in mind, I think we can come together as a community and say, you know, we're all in this struggle together. We're at different places, different perspectives, but we care for each other, and we support each other, and we encourage each other.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that's the kind of community feeling that we're trying to create with vegan spirituality,
which is great.
What do you see as the future of veganism and Christianity? How they can work together?
Well, it's hard to know for sure. I mean, obviously the groundwork is there. I mean, the scriptures themselves. You know, I mentioned Genesis, also the prophecy of Isaiah, in which at the end of time, all creatures will live together in peace and harmony. They won't eat each other. The lion will eat straw. Such a change would take an act of God or major changes in evolution, to be sure. But this is an ideal, again, described in the Bible. So the Bible, I think, lays out the ideal really very clearly. And so we don't necessarily need to do a huge amount of biblical interpretation. It's more a matter of getting the word out and getting people inspired. What will it take to get people inspired? Well, that's hard to know for sure. One thing that I think is going to make a difference is that we may find that people are sort of forced towards a vegan or near vegan diet out of necessity. That more and more we're realizing that our health is very much impacted upon the way that we eat, and if you don't want to you know, die young or at least be very ill at a relatively early age, moving towards a plant-based diet is going to be important for you. We may find that the environmental impact of meat and other human activities, and the other things that we're doing to reduce sustainability for humanity will force people more towards a plant-based diet. Just as during World War II, a lot of people ate very little meat because it just wasn't available. And we may find that that's happening again. I'd rather see a world which is plentiful and people are joyfully living with each other, and we could have such a world. It's tragic that we may find that what's best for the animals long term in terms of their well-being is the fact that we don't have the resources to continue to exploit them on the scale that's happening currently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that can very definitely happen. And now all of these billionaires are investing in these plant-based meats.
Sure.
And evidently the agricultural industry is quite aware of this, and I guess Tyson Foods just invested in one of those companies, those plant-based meat companies.
Well, after all,
recently. So
the people
happening.
that are the producers of the animal flesh and secretions and the like, they're not in the business of torturing animals. They're in the business of making money. They don't care how they make the money. They just want to make the money. So if there's money to be made in non-animal foods, that's fine with them. They don't enjoy harming animals. They don't shrink away from it in any way. They don't object to it in any way, but they don't do it because they're sadistic or want to harm any creatures. They just do it because currently there's money to be made in it.
Yeah, and that's, a big key is finding other ways for them to make money.
Right. So if
the demand is going up for plant-based meat, so that's a good thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that there's technical issues that need to be hurdles to overcome before it's something that people can buy at a cost-effective level. But it's certainly a very encouraging development. And some of these mock meats that have been coming out that are very tasty, there's just if you really crave that taste and that feel in the mouth, well, there's ways to reproduce it pretty closely with plant-based foods.
Right. And I think more and more people are discovering that, and now you're seeing it in regular grocery stores.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yep. So there's reasons for encouragement, although at least in the short term, the prognosis for non-humans isn't terribly good. That is to say, I don't see a very rapid and dramatic change from the status quo into the near future. One might think that the current administration, or I should say the incoming administration, I don't necessarily have a lot of confidence that they're going to necessarily support a lot of the issues that we're concerned about, but time will tell on that.
Right, yeah, and that, of course, that puts it back on us to educate people and use boycotting instead of depending on the government to change.
One of the things I'd like to mention is that there's a perspective which is distinctively Christian, but not necessarily uniquely so, which is that in Christianity, I think there's a strong tradition of a belief that we are to act faithfully, that we're supposed to do our best, do the right thing, try to make a difference, try to help as much as possible. But at the end of the day, our role is not to cure the world of all its ills and evils, but rather to do our best and to serve faithfully. And so that we don't necessarily have the burden of feeling like if the animals continue to be harmed, it's our fault. It's not our fault. We do the best we can. We struggle. We have an obligation to struggle. Even if it seems that the barriers are insurmountable, we still should struggle as best we can because you never know what the outcome is going to be. But at the end of the day, all we can be is faithful. We cannot make the world change just because we will it to be that way.
I love that, Steve. Serve faithfully.
Right.
And just be content knowing that we did the best we could.
It's all we can.
Yeah, we're talking about something huge here.
Right, right. And I grieve for the animals, but I don't feel it's my fault. And that's all I can do.
Yeah. Okay, that's beautiful. I think that's very helpful because a lot of us really struggle with that guilt.
Sure.
So I wanted to also ask you, some of our listeners are Christian, but some are also from other faith traditions. So what advice do you have to help us all stay spiritually strong as we work to liberate animals from human violence? And what you just said is right on target with that. But do you have any other advice for us?
Well, I think that we have to take care of ourselves, physically and spiritually. And that means that sometimes it's okay to have a little fun and relax. We don't have to be fighting this fight 24/7. And so I think that makes a difference. And I think that we can find commonality with people of other faiths. Perhaps one good way is through the so-called golden rule, because virtually all religious traditions and faiths have some sort of variation on the golden rule, so that people who
Right.
have different metaphysics, they call whatever whatever that mysterious force in the universe which seems to be responsible for the mysteries of life and death and the rest. They call it different names, and they have different ideas about how those forces interface with the earth and humanity and the like. But they have the common ground that ethically we should do to others as we would want others to do to us, or some variation on that phrase. And so, I mean, we have a common language that way, even if some of our metaphysical convictions may differ from each other.
Right. Yeah, that's a real common ground that I think we can reach out to others of different faiths and find that common ground with them.
Sure. So, I think how do we get on with our lives? I think that's just different for different people. We have different needs, different desires. But I think that if we have the sense that the burden of the problem rests on our shoulders, and if we don't stop it, it's going to continue. It becomes overwhelming, and then one ends up despairing and I think burning out. And to carry on for a long time, I think you have to take care of yourself to a degree, and just try to find a balance between the obligations of activism and the needs of our own bodies and souls. Got to exercise, eat right. Because eating vegan is not the same as eating right. You can have the potato chip diet.
That's true.
And nurture relationships that are meaningful and valuable, because I think most of us need that.
Right. Yeah. Well, maybe it's time to open up to questions. I'll bet we've got some. Lisa, do we have some hands raised?
Yeah, Judy. So we have a few questions that were sitting in the queue, and one of them to ask about scapegoating and your use of the word, and what, clarify a little more about what that means.
Sure. I mean, I'm hesitant to delve into this too much because it is a kind of a complex topic. And it took me a book to sort of fully explicate what I have in mind. And there's a lot of subtleties that I would have to ignore or gloss over. But it's the notion of bringing in the context of Christianity, and the book and the rest, the scapegoat is the one who's blamed for the problems in the community. There's always tensions in a community. Humans have trouble living with each other, for a variety of reasons, which I talk about in the book. We have trouble living with each other, and so we find that that tensions tend to rise, particularly because there's always scarcity, and people will always be competing for scarcity. If nothing else, attractive mates are scarce. Whatever it means to be attractive in a community. In some communities, it's one body type, for example. In another community, it might be different. That doesn't matter. Whatever it is, there's always going to be competition for attractive mates, and there's going to be resentment because some people get so-called attractive mates and some people do not. And that can tear communities apart. And especially in primal communities where they have to stay together for purposes of protection and or hunting, if the community is torn apart, they may die. So how do they resolve the problem? Well, they'll blame a usually marginal member of the community for the tensions that have been rising, and that person then becomes the scapegoat because everybody then starts to blame this person. And when they kick that person out of the community, which is analogous to the scapegoat in the Bible, where the sins of the community are put onto an actual goat who's then banished to the wilderness. If they kick them out, then they feel better because they've had a sense of camaraderie in the process of scapegoating, and the resentments that they've had have been relieved. Well, this works, at least in the short term, to bring communities together until new tensions rise. So from a societal standpoint, sometimes the scapegoating can be rather convenient. When there's a crisis, when there's a disease or a famine, if you can identify certain individuals and blame them for that, even if they're totally innocent, for a while people feel better about the situation, feel more comfortable, feel more connected to each other. The problem is it's not just. It's just wrong to do it because, for starters, you're falsely accusing individuals. And so what Christianity tries to bring in is the notion that, and again, I'm not saying this is unique to Christianity, but the teachings of the Bible, and there's a lot along these lines, that we can build community based upon a common love of the Creator, God, and that this is what can bring us together, that we all share this common devotion and dedication to God, and that the community is serving God rather than trying to serve our own needs and desires, which invariably lead us into conflict with each other. Whether that really works is a good question. The cynic would say that could never work. We're human, but it's what Jesus had in mind. So my thinking is, it's okay to say, I can't buy this. I don't believe this. And I'm saying, okay, then don't buy into Christianity. It doesn't make sense to you. But if it makes sense to you, if you really believe that it might work, and it's really an act of faith, but if you believe that that might work, then there's something to be said for the Christian faith.
Wow, thank you.
One way to look at it. One way to look at it. That's the way I see it. That's the way I see it. I'm not saying that I'm the arbitrator of what it means to be Christian, but that's how I understand Christian faith.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for clarifying that. And then we also had another question that's kind of related to that one. It's, I'll just get that from the chat box. It was, why don't humans do the right thing simply because it's the right thing to do? Why do we need to be persuaded through religion and other means?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be through religion, to be sure, but I do think that that humans are in conflict. I think there's a part of the human psyche that wants to be connected to other individuals and even to non-humans and to the world at large. It wants to feel connected. And I think one of the reasons why we admire spiritual leaders is that oftentimes these are individuals, oftentimes vegan or vegetarian by tradition, who are so connected. And we admire that and we respect that and we kind of want to be like that. But there's another part that has other desires. And, there's certain foods that we like, whether that's cultural or biological, it doesn't matter. It's something that people will crave. And people want a certain amount of ego enhancement for a variety of reasons. And I talk a little bit about that in the book as well. But that means, being more powerful, successful, over other individuals. There's always going to be desires that have to do with sexuality, and that's going to always create a certain amount of tension within communities and conflict, because people will find that those that they find sexually attractive, other people find sexually attractive, and they can't all be satisfied. So these are reasons that people find themselves in conflict. We don't have to hurt each other, but I think we'll always find that there's going to be tensions, even in the most enlightened spiritual communities. There's going to be some tensions. That's okay, as long as we identify the tensions, talk them out, work them out, and seek nonviolent solutions to the struggles that come with living as human beings who are creatures like other creatures on Earth, with strengths and limitations and struggles.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. I do want to recommend to everybody to get Steve's 2 books. They're very, very good and very encouraging.
But they're different. They're very different from each other. Good News for All Creation is kind of a primer for Christianity and veganism, and Guided by the Faith of Christ, Seeking to Stop Violence and Scapegoating, has a lot of sociology and psychology and anthropology, as well as biblical interpretation. It's a more scholarly kind of a book. I tried hard to make it very readable and accessible, but it's a different kind of book, to be sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're both just excellent. So I highly recommend those, and I recommend going and signing up at the website so that you can get the weekly newsletter which I get every week, and I love it. Always
Thank you.
new ideas. Yeah, very good.
It's sort of I include several things, and I usually have a short weekly essay. Yeah, usually I sort of have a theme, and I carry it for 3 weeks, and then move on to other themes. Yeah.
Right.
And what is the website? If you could say it again for us, and I'll type it in.
Sure. Christian Veg, that's VEG, christianveg.org.
Okay, I just posted that for everyone. And I wanted to also invite, like I mentioned at the beginning of this gathering, that we'd love to have other people join in. So at this time, if you'd like to ask a question, you can turn your video on and ask us a question, or just ask it. If you're on the phone, you can unmute yourself actually and ask your question directly to Steve, or make a comment to him. Let me just make sure that that's happening for everybody here. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and do that. It's on the far right bar. You'll see a little audio sign and a video sign. You can do one or the other or both. Yay, here comes someone. Well, you're welcome to do that. And if you have a question, you can just say it with confidence to all of us, or you can. Yes, is somebody joining us? I think Christine is asking a question. She's doing it through the chat box. So, how has the book Dominion affected things?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Oh, the question is, how has the book Dominion affected things in the Christian community and beyond?
It's hard for me to answer. I'm not sure what impact it's had. It certainly is a very well written, very well thought out book, and I'm very impressed with what Matthew Scully has done with it. It's been well received in much more conservative Christian circles, and so I'm very pleased that it's out there and it's had a positive reception. How much of an impact it's had, I'm really not sure. It's interesting because in more conservative and fundamentalist Christian circles, it's been my impression that oftentimes, there's a sense of judgment, and that those people who are sinful deserve to be punished in various ways. I'm not saying this is true of all people from that background, but that's been my impression, that that's a common thread. But non-humans, by virtue of being totally innocent, should not be treated badly. They don't deserve anything bad. And so Matthew Scully makes a strong case that we're called to be merciful towards the animals, and they don't deserve what's happening to them. And this has actually been pretty well received in Christian circles, who otherwise are not necessarily open to points of view that say we should have compassion to so-called quote sinners of various kinds.
Interesting. Yeah, and part of what we're seeing happening now is people going, okay, we'll be merciful, and instead we'll just eat animals that were locally and so-called humanely raised. And so that has been kind of a fallback position for a lot of Christians and, people, who aren't of any particular faith, that agree, yeah, we shouldn't hurt animals, but they're thinking that they can still go ahead and eat them as long as they're treated, or they're told that they're treated nicely until the day of their death.
Right.
Somehow are able to ignore the fact that they were violently killed.
Sure.
But that really has made it harder for a lot of us to educate about mercy.
Well, there's always going to be efforts by industry to convince people to consume their products, and we can't stop them from doing that. We can try to prevent them from having false advertising, but it's always a struggle. A lot of it has to do with, people believing things they want to believe.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm currently reading the good book called Farm to Fable, which deals with this very problem of people believing the so-called humane myth. I personally like to, encourage less less inhumane methods of raising animals. I don't like this, but to assert that those methods are humane, it's just factually wrong. They're just less inhumane. And
well,
so
that's a good way to put that. Yeah, less inhumane.
Or as David Sistabel once described it, as reducing animal ill-fare rather than trying to improve animal welfare, because it's still not welfare. So it's more a matter of just, sort of addressing things truthfully and honestly, which is something that a lot of people have been resisting. A lot of people don't want to know about factory farming. They say, I don't want to know about that. And so those who then say, well, then I'll just get it from a producer who claims to be, quote, humane. But again, it's our challenge and our job to do our best to kind of just spread the truth. We don't have to, we don't have to embellish. It's just the truth. We don't have to try. We don't need slick advertising in the sense of trying to disassemble the truth. But it's just a matter of getting the truth out there to unfortunately a relatively resistant population, because a lot of people don't want to know the truth. It's an unpleasant thing.
Right.
I mean, I think a lot of people kind of have the notion that if they really found out what was going on, they would be faced with an unpleasant dilemma: either lead a life that they knew was not ethical, or give up food that they don't wish to part with. So a lot of times,
and deal, with the social consequences of that.
The social and the dietary and all the rest. And so I think a lot of what we need to do is rather than say you should be a vegan, rather say this is how animals are treated, this is how I live, and you've got to make the choice that's right for you. And that way, not telling people, you can never have turkey at Thanksgiving, because a lot of people, if they're told that, they'd say, well, I don't think so. This is not where I want to be. And so they may well find that they don't want turkey at Thanksgiving anymore, but that's down the road. When they're first, 2 or 3 meals a day eating animal flesh, the notion that they're going to have to stop altogether, it's just not. And then if you throw in, the dairy and the eggs and all the rest, they'd say, I could never do that. And so they move on. So their brains goes from I could never do that to I can think of 6 good reasons why I don't need to ever do that, rather than that's, you've raised some challenging questions, and I've got to think about that and see how I can incorporate that into my life.
Right.
I think we have to be mindful of human psychology, difficult though that is.
Yes.
But it's their choice, like it or not. I can't force anybody to eat a certain way. So that being the case, I've got to meet them at a level where they're going to be receptive to my message. Because if they're going to tune me out, I have not done anybody any good.
And I think a lot of that. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thanks. One of the questions that we have on here is, what is the impact that you think that CVA, the organization that you are with, that you've had since it started? Do you think it's had an effect, and what has that been?
Well, I've certainly had a lot of people contact our organization saying that our booklets have made a difference for them, affirming and enhancing their commitment, or encouraging them to change the way they lead their lives. So I think it's made a difference, and I think that we've, by offering support for those who are struggling in their families and their churches, I think that's made a difference. It's hard to put a real metric on that, but I think it's been a valuable ministry, and exactly how valuable is hard to say, but I certainly think it's worthwhile, and that's kept me going on it for many years.
That's wonderful.
Well, thank you for answering that, and it is important to have those voices out there so people know they're not the only one, and to be able to have the resources that you've provided. You have the websites you are part of provide a lot of resources.
Sure.
for people. Yeah. So I'm wondering, we're going to wrap up soon, but I'm wondering, does anyone else have any other questions, either in the chat box, or if you'd like to say something and join us on video, that's fine too. It's kind of fun to do that if you'd like to, or even just using your voice on the telephone. Let's see. Okay, well, I'd like to say just briefly, thanks to Pastor Rob, who's joined us tonight. He runs a humanitarian project, and he was very excited to learn about this webinar, and we're happy to welcome him into our community. So I know you're there, even if you don't want to pop on the video. I just wanted to thank you for joining us. And I think we also, anyone else would like to say anything? Give a moment for that. And if not, what we can do is we can move into our closing. We usually do a prayer, a meditation, and
Steve has a meditation for us.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I've been looking forward to that.
I'll read it if you wish.
Okay.
Yes,
yeah.
I offer a meditation on mindfulness. Many of us lead busy lives in which completely essential tasks is the main focus of attention, and many of us find that our free time is easily filled by mindless diversions, such as attending to the foibles of celebrities or watching sports. These activities fill our time, but they rarely fill our souls. We need a sense of purpose, and we can best accomplish this when we connect with our ground of being. People have different terms to describe what they see as their ground of being, including nature, the cosmos, or God. In all cases, connecting to our ground of being involves having meaningful, satisfying relationships that enrich our lives. The broader these relationships are, the broader is our sense of connection to our ground of being. Meaningful, satisfying relationships require being mindful of how our actions affect others. Perhaps more than any other action we take, how we eat reflects our relationship to the cosmos. At some level of consciousness, we understand that consumption of the bodies of abused and murdered victims means that we see ourselves in harsh conflict with the vast majority of fellow beings. In contrast, to the degree that we aim to tread lightly on the earth, we develop a sense of affinity with all beings. We become mindful that we all desire to thrive and enjoy life, just as we all desire to avoid the pains and sorrows that are inevitable consequences of living on earth. And so, I encourage us to seek harmlessness in all actions, so we may look at the birds, the land animals, the fishes, and all the amazing forms of life on earth and say, I am your friend.
Oh, that's beautiful, Steve. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. We also have some folks who've joined us this evening. They want to thank you as well, and to mention that you have thought deeply about all of the things that you presented tonight, and we just want to offer our gratitude to you for this wonderful hour.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a wonderful treat.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to just say that we have a couple of announcements. Our next Vegan Spirituality online gathering will be the second Thursday in December, and we have the folks who started Vegetarians in Paradise, Zell and Ruben. I don't know if anyone knows them, but they've been around for a while, putting together recipes and wonderful things, and so they're going to join us and share what their perspective is on vegan spirituality. So we're looking forward to that. And Judy, did you want to say something else?
I was just going to say, if are you ready to have everybody say goodbye, like we usually do? But if you have some more announcements, please go ahead.
Okay. So we're also, one other thing that's so in line with what Steve does with his group, we started some of you may know from other meetings, we started an interfaith vegan coalition where we're trying to gather together as a group and provide resources for people who are in different places of worship to ask the facilities to adopt some vegan policies and vegan practices. So that's something we've been working on. And we recently became familiar and met with a group called the Interfaith Vegan Alliance, which is a group with a similar goal, and that is in the UK. So it's kind of fun to really see and meet all the people in our community and how much it's growing internationally. So stay tuned. We'll share more about these interfaith projects with you as we go along. So with that, I'm super excited to have spent this time with all of you and feel so blessed to be able to hear the wise words of Steve and also such great questions from everyone who joined us. It's really it's like a sacred space, even though it's a cyberspace that we create, and it's really a special opportunity to be together in this way, to explore what does it really mean to be vegan in a spiritual way. So thanks to Steve, and thanks to Judy for being an amazing co-host, and thanks to everyone for joining us. And if you would like to, you're welcome to turn your videos on and turn on your audio. We could all have a good night together. Yay! There's Suzanne.
Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, it's coolest. Oh,
thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's wonderful.
It was really
Namaste.
helpful.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, you too. This is a great format.
Yeah, it is.
Yes,
Oh,
I like this setup too.
perfect. Thank you for the feedback. It's a delight to see all of you. How wonderful. Well, have a great evening, everyone, and thanks so much to Steve, and we'll really see you, hopefully next month.
Okay.
Good night.
Thank you
Great.
again, Steve and Judy
Bye.
and Lisa.